Chicago. Good afternoon, everybody. So I want to hear from you. Before I start this speech, I just want to thank Sujata, of course, for that amazing introduction. The great treat of my life, and I'm sure I share this with many of you, is to work with a lot of fabulous women. And so it's just really something to watch Sujata do what she's doing at CFW and to have a chance to share my thoughts with you today. I also want to make one other note here because we're proud Chicagoans. I road tripped over here with Amina Dickerson, one of your board members and a great woman grant maker, and I thank her for her support. So before we get going on the speech, I can't see those. Oh, here we are. So because it's Michigan, one of the women in my generation who has really gone on to do wonderful things in the public sphere is Debbie Stabenow, U.S. Senator. And Debbie's a dear old friend, and I told her I was coming to Detroit to meet with all of you, and I said, do you have a picture that you could share with the group that would sort of give us a feeling of what you're doing each day and how you feel about your work? And we sort of talked about it, and she had her staff send me this picture, which you see, which I think says it all. There are those fabulous women U.S. senators. So I wanted you to know we have greetings from Debbie. We'll do the other one now. And then I have one more picture I want to show you. You recognize one person there. Sujata. The person in the middle is Toni Preckwinkle. She's president of the Board of Commissioners of Cook County, which happens to be larger than about half the states. An amazing woman. I'm going to talk a little bit more about her in my speech. And my purpose in showing you this picture of Debbie and of Toni, and of Debbie and the other senators is just a little bit of inspiration as we gather here today. So I wanted to begin this talk by reminding you of an important workshop that's going to be happening later this afternoon, led by distinguished pollster and political advisor Celinda Lake. The workshop on research findings on women's appearance and media coverage will preview findings from Name It, Change It's groundbreaking research, which I think you've probably read about this week. It's been a fantastically well and thoughtfully covered, I think. It occurred to me that Celinda's presence, and probably others here today that I may not have met yet, is a reminder of just how fortunate we are to have gifted leaders who have kept at this work for decades. When Celinda and I first met, I think in the first year of The Woman, we did not know, we couldn't have dreamed of what we could achieve if we just kept at it. Thank you, Celinda, for your leadership, and see you later. Your conference program states the purpose of my talk today as follows. The intersection of race and gender, in politics has long presented a barrier to women running for office and to women seeking to be influential public advocates on issues and policies that affect women and their families. Learn what strategies women can deploy to have a more powerful decision-making role on the issues that matter to our future. I am going to discuss these strategies with you, but I have a secret and I confess. I'm also going to share with you a frank, no apologies necessary, woman-to-woman, when leaning in isn't enough truth about how you personally can get from here, already a leader, an important advocate of programs that benefit women and girls, to there, an ever-widening and deepening role as a public leader across all sectors of decision-making affecting women and girls and our families, whether as an elected or appointed official, a political staffer, or a community or organizational leader. In fact, I'm actually going to preview my hashtag Girl Politics checklist with you, more fully discussed in my book, Every Day is Election Day. My underlying theme today really is, every day really is election day for you, your family, our community, and our world. Here is why. Thinking of every day as election day is the only way for you to build a consistently influential public voice and an ever more visible personal presence. to create a unique and immutable personal brand and message, to make yourself ever more valuable to your colleagues, grantees, organizational partners, and the decision makers in your community, and to change the world into one our sisters, brothers, and families need and deserve. Lest you doubt the importance of this approach, of being a part of even leading a movement to build more American women public leaders, here are some numbers that circumscribe the woeful state of U.S. women's public leadership today, not for lack of trying by all of us, but just because there's that much more work to do. First, the numbers on women in public office. In the legislative branch, 200 years since the Republic's founding, the U.S. Congress, even in the face of the historic victories of 2012, is only 18% female. Women make up only 24% of all state legislators nationwide. Approximately 1,700 of them serve in the 50 state legislatures in 2013. In the executive branch, only 5 of 50 states have women governors. However, the good news is in 2014, 32 states will elect governor. Time to get busy. There are only 3 women mayors among the mayors of the 10 largest American cities. Happily, another piece of good news, this may change in 2013, since both Los Angeles and New York have viable women candidates. Okay. So, as you know from your own work, municipal problems are women's problems, so I say, why not all 10 of them? And among all U.S. cities with populations over 30,000, there are 1,200 of them. Only 17% have a woman mayor. Women also don't hold a point of office in their proportion in the population, not by a long shot. And of course, we've never had a woman president. Yet, yes. And then there are women in business. In the Fortune 500, there are 21 women CEOs. 10 years ago, this CEO number was 7. At this rate, parity is hundreds of years out. The Fortune 1000 has another 21 women CEOs for a grand total of 4%. Women-owned businesses are only 29% of U.S. non-farm firms, though owning one's own business is frequently the best way for a woman to achieve economic autonomy and public power. Notably, nearly half of all firms owned by African Americans are owned by women, demonstrating that women will find a way, no matter the odds, to feed themselves and their families. And finally, most employed women are still in gender stereotyped jobs with a significant wage gap, thereby lessening their ability to achieve autonomy, not to mention the economic security they deserve and so important to engaging in public life. Last, there is the position of women in philanthropy. Here are those distressing numbers. The farther up the staff ladder and compensation scale you go, the fewer women you find. Even in comparable jobs, men's salaries are significantly better. And the larger the foundation, the less likely it's run by a woman, even when women predominate among the staff, as they increasingly do. Here are those numbers. Women run 57% of foundations with a budget size of less than $250,000, but only 17% of those with a budget of $50 million plus, and even only 28% of budgets 10 to 25 million. Tragically, we'll all be dead and gone before parity is reached in philanthropy's executive suite. You do the math, we need a movement. And here is how to think about being a part of that movement. First, your purpose in this movement is to become a leader in creating structural change that benefits all women. Yes, your individual achievement is important, and yes, it will be valued by others, but individual achievement alone does not a movement make, nor does it induce a society that it is fair to women and girls. Group action that impels structural change does. So yes, absolutely lean in, but also push back. And thanks to Maria Shriver for suggesting that requisite next step. Second, there is no need before you enter the fray, and this is really, really important because so many of us think, oh, gee, we just have to hold back and wait. There is no need to spend time advocating for parity or for some magic women's participation percentage or absolute number. As you can see, parity is centuries off. And as you also know yourself, every one woman matters, so why not start now? Third, choose to be a leader of something specific that matters deeply to you. Pick a cause or an organization or a political campaign, including your own, that makes your heart sing. If you do, then no matter how tired you get, you'll never be too tired to do the work that needs doing. Fourth, don't engage alone. You can't anyway. We are a sisterhood. And sisterhood is needed to get the job done. It's also very powerful, as Robin Morgan has told us. As part of this sisterhood, develop a powerful and diverse decision-maker network, one that will deliver in myriad contexts and whose members will be with you through thick and especially through thin. Fifth, make sure that no matter what you are advocating, whether it's, say, equal pay or better child care or better health care, that you make clear you bring to this case a unique understanding of the issue, whether that understanding is based on your own personal experience or on substantive expertise, that will make your view valued. Sixth, recognize that there will always be competition and that that's a good thing because competition keeps you in top shape. Finally, remember that structural racism as well as structural sexism still exists in the United States, notwithstanding, this is something important here, notwithstanding there are roots to public influence and power that do work for all women. Here are two wonderful stories, one from New Mexico and one from Mississippi, that prove this point. I met New Mexican Deanna Archuleta and Mississippian Gwen Page writing my book. Their success provides inspiration for all of us to just get out there. Gwen Page is superintendent of schools in Mississippi's East Jasper School District. Her mantra is, this is a quote from Gwen, "You've got to ask for what you want and expect to get it." Let's put this mantra in context. Gwen spent her childhood in a 3-room shack with no indoor plumbing. Gwen remembers a bus ride she took one day not long ago outside Clarksdale. As the bus passed the cotton plantation where her grandmother had worked, she realized she was seated next to a fellow teacher whose family had owned the plantation. "I'm 38 now," Gwen said to me, "and I have washed clothes on a scrub board, I've chopped cotton, we've come a long way, do you hear me?" Yet Paige's mother always said to her, "Why be a nurse when you can be the doctor?" Deanna Archuleta, who was a senior advisor to President Obama's Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar, says her mother taught her, "No one is any different from you. No one should be intimidating to you, no matter what neighborhood you come from." In fact, Deanna started her career as a public leader, as a neighborhood mom, advocating for a safe crossing for neighborhood children. Then she became head of the PTA, a county commissioner, and organizational director, and then it was off to the White House. Yes, we can. Now, to do like Gwen and Dina do, here is the girl politics scoop, the woman-to-woman truth as I see it. Certain personality traits are required to achieve success in the public square. Others can give you a bonus. Possession of all of them will help you as you navigate the sometimes shark-infested waters of public life. Ideally, you'll enjoy developing these skills. In any case, you'll need the intellectual and intestinal fortitude to obtain and deploy them. That's just the plain truth. This checklist will help you gauge how prepared you'll be for your campaign and how much you'll have to learn to stomach. It will help you understand how your stronger qualities will help compensate for your weaker ones. For instance, if you're someone who quickly assimilates information and easily processes and makes important decisions, but possesses only workwoman-like speaking skills, you can make that combination work. For your supporters and your constituents, not to mention your sister decision makers, will appreciate your ability and confidence in making tough calls quickly, overlooking that speech making. And, I'm sure this will resonate here, if you say you're a compelling fundraiser in one-on-one meetings with people you know, but dislike making begging phone calls to strangers, after all, who does? You'll probably be okay as long as you're willing to make some of those calls to strangers. Bottom line, you'll want to build and balance your talents and skills as you learn what they are. Here's the checklist. Are you a happy person? Though Abraham Lincoln, one of our greatest presidents, was a depressive, I think he's the exception that proves the rule when it comes to public leadership. Most of our leaders exude optimism. They know they need to remain positive, especially in tough times when people need them the most. Are you empathetic? The question here isn't whether you like to hug strangers and kiss babies. It is whether you can make a personal connection to other people and care about their experiences. Can you demonstrate that sympathy in ways that a stranger can feel? For instance, are you willing to be a regular volunteer at your city's rape crisis hotline or domestic violence shelter? Can you hang with the locals? Can you, as politicians call it, grip and grin while eating corn dogs or chugging a beer? If you can't, it's time to practice. And remember that down home does not look the same in every neighborhood. You'll have to be flexible and adapt with a smile. Can you handle being in the public eye, even in private situations? Monica Banks, the first African-American elected countywide in Oktibbeha County, Mississippi, told me that her lunch is always interrupted, but she doesn't mind. She told me her home phone number is listed. New Illinois member of the U.S. Congress, Sherry Bustos, told me that when she was a candidate last year, her opponents always had a tracker at her events, a videographer who recorded every move she made. Will your family members and friends stick with you through thick and thin? The United States may finally have moved beyond the days when the wife of a male public figure has to stand by her cheating man. But if you get into trouble, you will want your husband, wife, or partner to stand by you. You will want to discuss the scenario, however unlikely, with your partner and other family members, just in case. And it can't hurt to preview potential minefields with your friends, too. Speaking of family, do you know your family history? And you have to decide whether you really want to, right? So this is the classic from last year, I thought. When U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren faltered last year during her Senate campaign over charges she'd mischaracterized her ethnic heritage in order to take advantage of minority status in professional settings, she told the media and the public that she had only claimed what her mother had told her was theirs, a Native American family heritage. Make sure you verify family stories. And on the subject of fact versus fiction, have you done opposition research on yourself? Do you know who you are in public records, in the memories of exes, on Facebook and Twitter and Google, and in whispered conversations between neighbors and among coworkers? Don't leave anyone out, especially those who don't care for you. How good are your negotiating skills? My favorite story about negotiating has to do with Eleanor Roosevelt's response to a request from a friend. In 1960, when John F. Kennedy was running for president, he sought the former First Lady's endorsement. She offered it on the condition that, if elected, he would appoint women to high-level positions in his government. After his election, President Kennedy appointed Roosevelt herself to head the nation's first-ever Federal Commission on the Status of Women. Like Eleanor Roosevelt, you will use negotiation to create change that will benefit others. Unlike Roosevelt, you will also use it to benefit yourself. Are you patient? Creating laws and policies, whether as an appointed or elected official, as a member of a board, or as a legislator, requires constancy with the opposition. Making the sausage takes time. As my friend Barbara Flynn Curry, the only woman to be majority leader of the Illinois House of Representatives, says, if you're out to change the world the day after tomorrow, this job isn't for you. Do you suffer from imposter syndrome? In the class I teach, yes, this is, I have to, this is just an aside. In this class I teach at the University of Chicago School of Public Policy Studies, it was one of my foreign students, a young woman, who asked this question of Barbara Curry. So she asked Barbara whether she thought the women she knows suffer from imposter syndrome. Barbara said no, with a very strong shake of her head. She said those she knows all have healthy egos. Self-doubt can crush a leader, particularly in a fast-paced environment that requires decision-making of the gut check sort. Gut check yourself on this one. Here's one that I think we all, I can't, if I had a nickel for every time I did this, I'd be rich. Do you have a habit of saying you're sorry? Apologies sometimes have a way of backfiring by suggesting that the power to have avoided the problem in the first place lay only with you. Because that's rarely the case, work on alternative language for patching up relationships. Can you bite your tongue even when your opponent is clearly in the wrong? Sometimes you will rebut forcefully, but at other times you will need to remember what your mother told you. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. I can hear Mom. Are you confident? You must have some faith in yourself to even conceive of being a public figure, as you all are already, and of campaigning for public office, whether appointed or elected, whether in an organization or in a public position. Are you confident, however, about your qualifications as well as your positions? If your resume is short, what do you know? What experience have you had? You'll need to present with certainty all of those attributes, positive ones that you possess. And related to that, how green are you? If you are young, have you worked up a case for why your youth shouldn't be an issue? Have your closest confidants told you your case passes their smell test? The younger you are when you get started, the further you will likely travel, so this is not by any means an admonishment to wait. To the contrary, just be prepared for the naysayers and have your answers at the ready. Are you willing to pay and keep paying your dues? If you think you've already paid all the dues you'll never need to pay, go to the beach. Paying your dues also means being willing to do scut work. It means being willing to climb the ladder, however many rungs it has. Whenever you get the chance, do this. Be sure that your allies know you're willing to do this. If they see it, it will show up in their support. Are you willing to run and run again and again if necessary? Toni Preckwinkle, whose picture I showed you, had to run 3 times before she won her first election to the Chicago City Council. Now she, as I told you, is president of the Board of Commissioners of Cook County, running the government of a county with a population larger than half of the state's. Are you good at building teams and appreciating the dynamics of teamwork? Are you able to think of yourself not just as team leader, but as team member too? You won't be leading by divine right. You were elected or appointed to serve. So your job includes collaborating with the other waitresses. If someone goes after you personally, are you willing to strike back? You're probably swallowing hard thinking about this. Don't choke, and do remember, during the 2012 presidential campaign, Barack Obama and Mitt Romney charged each other with lying frequently. Since both were using some fuzzy math, maybe they were right about each other's lack of honesty. Likewise, if your opponent attacks your integrity and your facts, you will need to be ready to do the same, strike back. Do you love power or the idea of having it? A tough one for a lot of women. Loving power isn't evil if you use it for public good. On the other hand, if having power scares you, you may have a hard time using it to achieve good. Are you willing to win only 50% plus 1? The availability of discrete and revealing pieces of data, like the kind that Celinda will share with us later, will allow you to concentrate your campaign on very specific voter segments. While there's no rule that says you have to be elected by people from every neighborhood, make sure you're comfortable with the implications of a narrow path to victory. This truth holds true for appointed office. An overwhelming number of endorsers from the same subset may get you the appointment you desire, but you will have to build support among other subsets in order to lead. Are you a teacher? 3/4 of all U.S. teachers are women. In Forbes, Bryce Covert reported that when Emily's List conducted focus groups with registered blue or pink-collared women, it found that women would rather support those who have an interest in community than career politicians. Those community-oriented leaders included nurses, firefighters, veterans, and teachers. Can you find joy in a toxic environment? Think about what you really like to do, right? So Amina and I had this conversation in the car yesterday. She's a great coach, and she was giving me some tools to do just this. Can you find joy in a toxic environment? Your quest for public leadership takes place in a world that is too often vicious. It also doesn't matter whether your town's public square is big or small. For instance, small town, school board, and PTA politics can be as competitive and hard-hitting as politics at the highest levels. Can you take some defeat without complaint? The New York Times reported Hillary Clinton has little patience for those whose privilege offers them a myriad of choices but who fail to take advantage of them. I can't stand whining, she said to Marie Claire magazine. I can't stand the kind of paralysis, are you listening, Carol? I can't stand the kind of paralysis that some people fall into because they're not happy with the choices they've made. You live in a time when there are endless choices. Last but not least, do you love winning so much that you can stomach losing? If you do, you're good to go. Last month, as part of Women's History Month, a Women's History Month celebration of women's public leadership, I gave a speech about Jane Addams. As you may know, 150 years ago, Jane Addams was a groundbreaking social justice activist, like so many of us here today, co-founder of the NAACP, founder of the Women's Peace Party and Hull House, Chicago's first community center, and the model for hundreds of others around the nation, and only the second woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. I have found Addams' life inspirational and her writings great guidance for my career ever since I first read her autobiography, 20 Years at Hull House, while in college. For Addams and the women who worked with her at Hull House show us the way to public leadership, the one that perseveres in the face of both individual challenges and structural barriers like racism and sexism. Addams and her sisterhood remind us helpfully that we are not the first American sisterhood and that we are never alone. One of Addams' biographers, Alan Davis, described the Hull House organizing process Addams undertook. Jane went from the Women's Club to the anarchist Sunday school, from elegant receptions in the palatial townhouses of Chicago's Gold Coast to travels through slums, from lecturing to some of the wealthiest women in the city to teaching poor and dirty children how to model in clay. Addams and her colleagues were willing to go wherever needed going. Take this truth to heart as I share some lessons of Addams' public leadership with you. From 20 years at Hull House, I identified these signposts, guides on that path. Choose a public mission everyone understands and will care about. Do your work as part of as many different social change groups as you can in order to increase your impact and influence. When you select those groups, make sure they are as committed to systemic change as you are. Engage in politics, not due to a desire for money or for power, but to achieve your goal of equality for women. Live a life every day that has meaning because it is lived in part in service to others. And think about your work and your personal life as one unbroken thread, weaving one whole cloth for one whole life. Of course, like many of us, Jane Addams didn't find it easy to determine which institution to join to fulfill her goal of putting things to rights, the expression she used to describe her reason for doing the kind of work we do today. In fact, she admitted, "I was absolutely at sea so far as any moral purpose was concerned, clinging only to the desire to live in a really living world and refusing to be content with a shadowy, intellectual, or aesthetic reflection of it." Nevertheless, she realized, those who believe that justice, capitalized in her book, is but a poetical longing within us, the enthusiast who thinks it will come in the form of a millennium, those who see it as established by the strong arm of a hero, are not those who have comprehended the vast truths of life. Actual justice must come by trained intelligence, by broadened sympathies toward the individual man or woman who crosses our path. One item added to another is the only method by which to build up a conception lofty enough to be of use in changing the world. Calling this her schoolgirl recipe, believe it or not, she founded Hull House. Foreshadowing Saul Alinsky, the inspiration for President Obama's public career and that of many others, Addams wrote, "We quickly discovered that nothing brought us so absolutely into comradeship with our neighbors as mutual and sustained effort, such as the paving of a street, the closing of a gambling house, or the restoration of a veteran police sergeant." You already have this comradeship in your work every day in your Women's Fund world. Use it now to advance women's public leadership even more, including your own. As to committing to politics and public office, Addams was appointed to the Chicago Board of Education in 1905. Not surprisingly, she found the experience frustrating. Nevertheless, she stuck with it, serving during a time when the school board and teachers were arguing over salary levels and how teacher competency would be measured. I bet this sounds familiar. We're talking, what, 100 years ago. Sometimes Addams engaged in politics, albeit holding her nose. Good story here. You'll have to, too. Here is Addams on this point. In order to pass the first factory law of Illinois, regulating the sanitary conditions of the sweatshop and fixing at 14 the age at which a girl might be employed, a little group of us addressed meetings of trade unions and benefit societies, church organizations and social clubs, literally every evening for 3 months. The Hull House residents that winter had their first experience in lobbying. You'll need that experience too. Addams wrote in 20 years at Hull House, she wanted to share the race life. This sharing meant creating opportunity for others as well as for herself, just what you want to do too. Here is Addams, and here I close, about that sharing. If in a democratic country nothing can be permanently achieved save through the masses of the people, it will be impossible to establish a higher public life. It is difficult to see how the notion of a higher civic life can be fostered save through common intercourse, which meant working together as we are. The blessings which we associate with a life of refinement and cultivation can be made universal and must be made universal if they are to be permanent. The good we secure for ourselves is precarious and uncertain, is floating in midair, until it is secured for all of us and incorporated into our common life. Let us continue to build that common life. Let us work individually, yes, and in sisterhood for all women and girls to share the race life. Thank you. So, thank you. Thanks very much. It's a treat to be here with you and to share these thoughts. And I invite those of you who have questions or comments to stand up, and someone with a mic will find you. I can't see at all.
I got it, don't worry.
Okay.
Hi, It's on yellow. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
You set out a very long list of
I did.
qualities
Right, I'm nothing if not a professor, right?
for public life. I just wondered if you had any advice for anyone here who thinks they have some of them, but not all of them.
Yes.
And whether that should...
That's a very good question.
Whether that means they should just give up now, or there's
No,
ways of
no,
developing.
no. You know, here I'm really glad, thank you for asking that question. I'm really glad that you said that. Here's the thing. What I see, and I'd be interested to know what others have seen, you know, Tiffany and others here who've done this work as well. There's this, you know, today it's so frequent that people are just repelled by public life, right? They see so much negativity, they see people being attacked, they see women being treated unfairly for a host of reasons, or not having equal opportunity. So when I sat down to write this book, I thought, well, you know, what I can do 30 years on or longer is just tell the honest truth and tell joyous stories. So no, you don't need to have all those qualities. You have to know that they will factor into that public life. And then, whether you're Gwen Page in Mississippi or Deanna Archuleta in New Mexico or wherever you are, you figure out how to manage it. So my goal, and I perhaps could have said it more clearly, is to have all of us understand that we have a duty to our sisters and a duty to ourselves to engage in this life, to understand what it requires, and to go for it, the same way you would if you decided you wanted to run a marathon. What is it going to take, right? Or, you know, climb a big mountain or something like that. It doesn't mean you don't do it. It means you understand what it will take. You catalog that, you assess it, you talk to your friends, you talk to your colleagues, and then do it, because it really does matter.
I want to start my question with a question or a statement. I'm a child of the 60s. That ought to say something to some of you. But you know, I have a colorful past, let's put it that way. I'm not embarrassed to say that, but that issue, hey Debbie, that issue of how the press digs into everybody's background, I think that's one thing that frightens a lot of people from entering the world of politics, because you're going to have all the truth come out, whether you like it or not. Right. And so what do you say to people who have that thought keeping them from jumping into the fray?
I say 2 words: Hillary Clinton. And I'm not speaking politically here. I have to tell you, I went back and read some of the stuff during the Whitewater and all that stuff that happened in the 90s with the Clintons. And I write about this in my book too. If I were she, I would have hid under the covers. I might never have come out, you know. But I looked at her and I thought, I read it and I thought, she just picked herself up. So I don't think... you do have to take the measure of your own life, and there are some things that don't fly, and there are some things that fly for men and don't fly for women, and it's just unfair. So that's another reason to be grateful for some of these women who have stepped out. There are others. I mean, take Senator Stabenow, who went through a very difficult divorce in a rather embarrassing situation a couple years ago. She was just reelected. You know, she didn't let that stop her. She said, that's not on me. I know how to work with the people of Michigan and help them out. So I think my only point is, take the measure of it, figure out what's right for you. In some cases, it can be appointed office and not elected office. That's a really, really important and great choice. Cynthia was telling me last night about a board that she was considering, and you know, that's a terrific thing to do. And that will keep you from some of that viciousness if you feel that you can't take it or your own biography won't withstand it.
Thank Thank you for your inspiring words, Rebecca. You know, when you showed the picture of Debbie and the other U.S. women senators, and from my standpoint as an African American woman, not seeing that reflected in that picture, and your comments around the intersection of racial equity and justice, could you talk about it from that perspective and building the base of those who right now might seem marginalized just by looking at that picture?
Thank you for that, Alana. I will tell you that I too am a child of the 60s. I knew about the civil rights movement before I knew about the women's movement. I knew about Dr. King because we talked about him at the dinner table when I was a child. So for many of us, I think that who have been around this block for a long time, the struggle is how to come together and be together. What I've found really interesting is that, for instance, in the state of Mississippi, there are more African American officials there than in any other state. Carol, I think I still have that right. So I do think that the doors have opened, the numbers are considerable. One thing that's very different and goes to your question, and which is why I hope more and more women will engage, is for most women, and this is less true of men, but for most women, you know, you start out locally and you move up and you move up and then you run for Congress or whatever. So we were talking about Robin Kelly, Amina and I yesterday, who just was elected to the U.S. Congress yesterday, African American woman from Chicago. And I was with Robin on Monday night, and we were chatting about it, and you know, she's pretty excited. And I said, well, how do you really feel? And she said, well, I feel blessed. And she said, I've worked really hard. She's 57. She was a state legislator. She was active in her community. She's done all kinds of things. Between the time she was a state legislator and she ran for Congress, she was Tony Preckwinkle's chief of staff, administration, an appointed position. So I think that the challenge is, number one, for us to call out racism or sexism when we see it, but also to understand that as women, there are these paths we can take, and that they are local, and in many cases, they're neighborhood-based. So for instance, if you live in a neighborhood where there's a local school council and you're a mom who cares about that school, it's the moms in your neighborhood, not from some other neighborhood, who are going to be able to run for that office. Similarly, one other story about the one African-American U.S. Senator we have had, Carol Moseley Braun. When Carol ran, there was a meeting, actually, sort of a secret meeting, about, well, what are we going to do here and who's going to run? And one of the things that was really interesting in that conversation was that, you know, Carol was determined to run. And I can tell you, 20 years hence, there were a couple of white women who were very interested in also running. Neither of them had the political experience Carol had. She was more qualified to run for U.S. Senate. I mean, you can't just decide you want to be a senator, right? You have to have the experience, just like you can't just decide I want to be a plumber or a surgeon or whatever. So for me, and Carol took those steps. She was a state representative before that. So I guess that's just by way of saying that for all of us, the job is to be smart and to be willing to start local, to build a base of the people who are right around us right now, to feel, as I mentioned, that 50 plus 1 is okay, I will figure this out, and I will make a statement for everybody once I'm in there, not just the people who elected me. Okay, it's 1 minute, so somebody who's a fast talker.
I promise I'll talk fast.
Okay.
I ran for mayor, lost by 42 votes against a 20-year political incumbent, ran for mayor again, ran for U.S. Congress, lost every time. So I just want to say to everybody, losing is okay. You increase your name ID each time, keep pitching. I'm here as a, well, you can applaud that. That's what we all need to hear, right? I happen to be here presenting with my good friend and partner, Julie Burton from Women's Media Center. I'm the president of the oldest organization that's been working to help women get elected in this office, Women's Campaign Fund, and our foundation, She Should Run. We are here to speak about how women can handle the inevitable and ubiquitous sexism that comes their way. That's at 2 o'clock right after this. Here's my question.
And I'm glad you're here.
All right. So here's my question. Research does show that the number 2 reason that women
Right.
don't step up to run for office is their concern about media attack, particularly sexist attack against their families. The number 1 reason that women report why they don't run for office, which is why we're ranked 97th in the world in the number of women in elected office, behind Cuba and Afghanistan, by the way, is because they're worried about work-life balance.
Yes, that's
What
right.
would you say to that?
What I did, it may be the longest chapter in my book, actually. I interviewed 30 women from a range of backgrounds and experiences, and some who've lost as well as won. What they said to me, and this isn't going to be news to anybody, this is sort of an oversimplification of a complicated topic, was no one has a right to take your dream away from you. Not your family, not your children, not your partner. But because you're a responsible person, you have the duty to figure it out, right? So if you're smart and you really want it, you figure it out. So in this chapter, I talk about some of the choices that these women have made and how they did balance a family responsibility and personal life and personal ambition. And in many cases, it's true, as is typical for a lot of women who run for office, they wait longer than men till their kids are a little more grown. But in other cases, that's not true. So I think that what I really respected and was so pleased to hear from those women was, I wanted to be a mom, for those who did. I wanted to be married, for those who are married. And I wanted to be somebody in public life and make a difference. And I have just decided I'm figuring this out. Gwen Page has got 2 children. She's had 2 children for over 20 years. She got a PhD. She's a superintendent of schools. She moved out of that shack in the Delta, wherever it was. I mean, there are all kinds of stories. So I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying that I would say to the women that I know who are worried about that your first duty is to figure out whether you can do this because you want it as much as you do, and to be responsible to your family, and then you'll just figure it out.